The violet dusk of Arcturus forecast long shadows across the barren landscape as Brandon Reeves completed his evening patrol. 6 years of self-imposed exile on this frontier world had taught him to trust the stillness of twilight, which was why the sudden streak of light tearing across the sky immediately set his nerves on edge. "Meteors don't change direction," he muttered, tracking the object's erratic descent with narrowed eyes. The trail of smoke and fire terminated somewhere in the northern ridge, no more than 3 kilometers from his shelter. Brandon shouldered his old military-grade rifle, a habit from his days in the Interstellar Defense Force, and began the careful trek toward the impact site. Each footfall stirred rusty dust that had never known Earth's gravity, a constant reminder of how far he'd run from his past. The fallen object had carved a shallow trench into the red soil before coming to rest in a small canyon. As Brandon approached, he realized it wasn't a meteor at all, but the remains of a small spacecraft, sleek and elegant in design, unlike any human vessel he'd ever encountered. The hull gleamed with an iridescent metallic sheen despite being cracked open like an egg. "Hello," he called, voice rough from disuse. "Anyone still alive in there?" His training took over as he conducted a careful sweep of the perimeter. The ship was small, perhaps an escape pod or personal transport, with most of its systems destroyed beyond recognition. Brandon ducked through the breached hull, his instincts screaming caution even as curiosity drove him forward. Inside, his flashlight revealed a cockpit designed for a pilot considerably larger than a human. The control interfaces featured unfamiliar symbols that pulsed weakly with residual power. A soft, pained sound drew his attention to a dark corner where debris had piled up. What Brandon found there would change the course of his life forever. Beneath a twisted panel lay a creature that resembled an oversized tiger cub, albeit one with 6 limbs and fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its body, perhaps the size of a large dog, was covered in deep blue fur with luminescent amber markings that pulsed softly. One of its limbs was twisted at an unnatural angle, and dark purple fluid, presumably blood, pooled beneath its heaving flank. Its eyes snapped open as Brandon approached, startling, intelligent eyes of molten gold that fixed on him with unmistakable awareness. The creature let out another sound, somewhere between a whimper and a growl. Colonial protocol was clear. Unknown alien life forms were to be reported immediately to the Xenobiology Division. Brandon's hand moved instinctively to his communication device. But something stopped him, something in those eyes. Pain, yes, but also an intelligence that seemed to evaluate him, even as its life ebbed away. In that momentary connection, Brandon felt a flutter of something in his mind. Not quite a voice, not quite an emotion, but something that didn't originate from his own thoughts. "You're telepathic, aren't you?" he whispered. The creature's eyes widened fractionally, and Brandon was struck by an instant of clarity. Reporting this find would mean surrendering the creature to endless tests and examinations. It would likely die on a sterile table, far from wherever it called home. 5 years ago, he had followed protocol to the letter. 5 years ago, during a combat training exercise, he had reported a malfunction instead of trusting his instincts. 3 cadets had died because of his adherence to procedure. "Not this time. I'm going to help you," Brandon said, kneeling beside the injured alien. "This might hurt, but I need to get you somewhere safe." He removed his thermal jacket, carefully wrapping it around the wounded creature. As he lifted it, the being stiffened and then went limp, its consciousness apparently fading. Yet even in unconsciousness, Brandon felt that strange flutter in his mind again, a tendril of awareness reaching out, connecting, holding on. The journey back to his shelter was nerve-wracking. Twice he had to hide from patrol drones, pressing his body against rock formations while cradling his precious cargo. Each time, the creature's heartbeat, he could feel 3 distinct pulses in its chest, seemed to synchronize with his own, slowing when danger approached, quickening when the path was clear. Brandon's home was a repurposed mining outpost, a small, reinforced structure built into the side of a cliff, offering protection from Arcturus IV's violent electrical storms. Inside was sparse but functional. A living area, medical station, and communications array he seldom used. He placed the creature on his examination table, once used for assessing mineral samples, but now converted to serve his occasional medical needs. The alien's breathing had grown shallow, the luminescent markings across its body fading to a dull pulse. "Stay with me," Brandon murmured, retrieving his medical kit. Basic xenobiology had been part of his military training, but nothing had prepared him for treating an unknown species. He started with the basics, cleaning the wounds, stabilizing the broken limb, administering a universal coagulant that worked across most carbon-based life forms. As he worked, the creature's eyes occasionally fluttered open, fixing on him with an intensity that transcended species. Each time, Brandon felt that same mental brush, a tentative connection forming between their minds. By midnight, the alien's condition had stabilized. Its breathing deepened, and the bioluminescent markings brightened to a steady amber glow. Brandon collapsed into his chair, exhausted but relieved. He hadn't realized how lonely he'd been until this strange creature had crash-landed into his life. "What should I call you?" he asked softly, reaching out to stroke the silky fur between its ears. The touch sent a ripple of images through his mind. Vast star fields, the curve of an unfamiliar planet, a soaring spire that gleamed like polished obsidian against an indigo sky. "Allura," he said suddenly, the name appearing in his mind from nowhere. "I think I'll call you Allura." The creature's ear twitched, and in his mind, Brandon felt a sensation of warm approval. That night, Brandon dreamed of stars he'd never seen and worlds he'd never visited. And through it all, a presence moved beside him, fierce, protective, and inextricably connected to his own. Morning on Arcturus 4 arrived with a crimson flare as its distant sun crested the horizon. Brandon awoke with a start, momentarily confused by the lingering fragments of alien dreamscapes. He quickly checked on his patient, only to find Allura already awake, golden eyes tracking his movements with calm assessment. "You're recovering quickly," Brandon remarked, noting the improved color in the alien's markings and the way it held itself, still injured, but with a newfound strength. "Whatever you are, you're resilient." Over the next few days, Allura's recovery progressed at an astonishing rate. The broken limb knitted itself together with minimal intervention, and by the end of the week, the creature was cautiously exploring Brandon's shelter, exhibiting curiosity about everything from his communication equipment to the dried rations he consumed. Brandon found himself talking aloud more than he had in years, explaining his surroundings, his daily routines, even fragments of his past. Though Allura couldn't respond verbally, the telepathic connection between them strengthened daily. Emotions came first: curiosity, gratitude, occasional flashes of what Brandon interpreted as homesickness. Then images, shared memories that flickered between their minds like half-remembered films. "You were someone important, weren't you?" Brandon mused one evening, watching as Allura practiced stalking movements across the floor of the shelter, regaining strength in her previously injured limb. He had begun thinking of the creature as female, though he couldn't articulate why. Perhaps something in the way her mind touched his. In response, Allura projected an image so vivid it made Brandon gasp: a vast chamber with soaring ceilings, walls that seemed to be composed of living crystal, and at its center, a figure seated upon a raised dais. The figure was similar to Allura in form, but much larger, with markings that blazed like captured fire across midnight blue fur. Around her neck gleamed a collar of some unknown metal, studded with gems that seemed to contain galaxies within their depths. "A queen," Brandon whispered. "Or an empress?" Allura's mental response carried nuance beyond simple affirmation. The figure was indeed an empress, but the relationship was complex, intimate. The next image showed a younger Allura, smaller, but recognizably the same, curled at the foot of the throne, while the Empress's six-fingered hand rested protectively on her head. "You were a pet?" Brandon asked, confused. Frustration radiated from Allura, followed by another image. The same scene, But now Brandon could feel the connection between the two beings, a bond similar to what was growing between himself and Allura, but deeper, cultivated over years. Not ownership, but partnership. Guardian. Confidant. I see, Brandon said softly. You were her protector. Satisfaction rippled through their mental link. What happened? Why were you in that ship alone? The images that followed were chaotic, fragmented by fear and pain. A male figure of Allura's species, larger and more heavily built, his markings a cold blue rather than amber. Shouting voices. The Empress's expression of shock. Allura being forced into the small ship, stars blurring as she fled. Someone betrayed you both, Brandon concluded. And now you're stranded here. Allura rose, moving to press against Brandon's leg. The gesture was simultaneously alien and familiar, like a house cat seeking comfort, but amplified by the telepathic wave of trust and gratitude that accompanied it. Brandon had spent years avoiding connection, punishing himself for past failures by choosing isolation on this frontier world. Yet here, in this unlikely bond with a creature from beyond human experience, he found something he'd been missing: purpose. We'll figure this out together, he promised, stroking the silky fur between Allura's ears. Whatever comes next, we face it together. That night, Brandon's dreams were more vivid than ever. He saw faces of creatures like Allura, heard languages he couldn't comprehend but somehow understood, felt the weight of tradition and expectation that shaped a civilization he'd never imagined. Throughout it all, a single phrase repeated, not in words, but in the essence of thought itself. Asterisk, danger comes. Prepare. Asterisk. He awoke at dawn to find Allura sitting perfectly still at the entrance to his shelter, her gaze fixed on the horizon. When Brandon approached, she turned to look at him, and for the first time, he heard her voice in his mind. Not impressions or emotions, but clear, articulated thought. Asterisk, danger comes. They have found me. Asterisk. The mental voice was feminine, cultured, with a strange accent that somehow translated even in thought. Brandon stared in shock, not at the warning itself, but the fact that they had crossed a threshold in their connection. You can speak directly to me now. Asterisk, our bond has deepened beyond mere impression. This is rare, even among my kind. Asterisk. And dangerous? Brandon asked, reading the undertone of concern in her thoughts. Forbidden, came the solemn reply. Asterisk, what we share should not be possible across species. It will make us both targets. Asterisk. Before Brandon could respond, Allura's head snapped up, her attention focused on the sky. Brandon followed her gaze, but saw nothing unusual in the rust-colored morning sky. They come, Allura's voice echoed in his mind. We must prepare. Brandon moved quickly, gathering weapons and survival gear. Years of military training hadn't been forgotten during his exile. If anything, the isolation had honed his tactical thinking. How many? He asked tersely. Asterisk, one hunter. But among my kind, one is sufficient. Asterisk. What should I expect? Instead of answering directly, Allura shared a rapid series of images and impressions, a being similar to herself but larger, wearing armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal across its form, weapons that harness energy rather than projectiles, combat capabilities that combined raw physical power with telepathic assault. Great, Brandon muttered. And how exactly do we defend against that? In response, Allura rose to her full height and then, to Brandon's utter astonishment, began to change. Her body elongated, the proportions shifting from feline to bipedal. The transformation wasn't the grotesque metamorphosis of horror vids, but an elegant, fluid rearrangement, as though her current form had always existed just beneath the surface of the one he knew. Within moments, where Allura the six-limbed feline had stood, there now rose a humanoid figure slightly taller than Brandon. She still bore the midnight blue fur with amber markings, but now they decorated a form with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a face that struck a balance between feline and humanoid features. Her eyes remained the same molten gold, regarding him with an expression that mingled apology with determination. This is my warrior form, she said, her actual voice a melodic contralto that matched the mental voice she'd been using. Among the Tigran, we adapt our physical structure to our purpose. I've been conserving energy to heal, but now I must fight. Brandon stared, struggling to reconcile this new being with the creature he'd rescued. You've been able to do this all along. The transformation requires considerable energy, Alora explained, examining her hands with their retractable claws. And our bond needed to strengthen before I could reveal my true nature. My species does not easily trust outsiders. I gathered that, Brandon said dryly. Any other revelations before our visitor arrives? Alora's expression grew solemn. Many, but time grows short. Know this. Was a royal guardian of the Tigran Empire. The Empress you saw in my memories, Vishara, raised me from a cub for this purpose. We shared a bond similar to what you and I have begun to forge. And the danger? The reason you fled? High Commander Zerax plots to assassinate Empress Vishara and seize power. I discovered his plans, but was captured before I could warn her. I was to be eliminated quietly, away from the home world, but I managed to escape in a scout vessel. Her ears flattened against her skull. They would not expect me to survive, much less form a bond with another species. Brandon was about to reply when a low rumble vibrated through the air. Unlike the chaotic crash of Alora's ship, this was the controlled descent of a craft designed for atmospheric entry. Somewhere, beyond a ridge, a new ship was landing. This hunter, Brandon asked, checking the charge on his rifle. Would they listen to reason? Alora's expression was grim. Karva is Zerax's most devoted enforcer. She believes absolutely in his cause. The females of my species are our warriors and hunters. Males serve as strategists and leaders. Alora moved toward the weapons Brandon had gathered, selecting a combat knife. I will face her alone. This is not your fight. Brandon placed a hand on her arm, surprised by the solidity of muscle beneath the silky fur. The moment I decided not to report finding you, it became my fight. We faced this together. Their eyes met, and through their bond flowed a complex mixture of emotions. Alora's concern for his safety, her surprise at his willingness to fight, and beneath it all, a growing warmth that transcended species and circumstance. Together, then, she agreed, mentally, the intimate connection of thought feeling more natural than spoken words. They moved out of the shelter and took up positions among the rocky outcroppings that surrounded it. Brandon's military training served him well as he identified defensible positions and sight lines, while Alora guided him through mental impressions of Tigran hunting strategies. They didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour after the landing, a figure appeared on the ridge above Brandon's shelter, tall, powerfully built, and clad in armor that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the morning light. Like Alora, this Tigran stood upright on two legs, but her fur was a deep russet color marked with silver patterns. A mask covered the upper portion of her face, with lenses that surely enhanced her already formidable senses. Alora, guardian of the royal chambers, the hunter called out, her voice carrying easily across the distance. By order of High Commander Zerax, you are to be executed for treason against the Tigran Empire. Brandon felt Alora's mental touch. Asterisk, stay hidden. Let me attempt to reach her first. Asterisk. Before he could protest, Alora stepped out from her hiding place, standing tall and unafraid in the open ground before the shelter. Karva, she acknowledged. You've been deceived. Zerax is the traitor, not I. The hunter, Karva, dropped from the ridge with graceful menace, landing in a crouch before straightening to her full height. She towered over Alora by at least a head. Your lies dishonor your rank, Karva growled. Zerax showed us the evidence. Your communications with off-world mercenaries, your plot to assassinate Vishara. Fabrications, Alora replied calmly. You know me, Karva. We trained together. Would I betray my bond partner? Something flickered in Karva's posture. Doubt, perhaps. You disappeared the night before the planned attempt. Your shuttle was tracked heading for the border sectors. I was abducted from my quarters and placed on that shuttle, unconscious. Zerax meant for me to die anonymously in space. Alora took a step forward. Search your instincts, Carva. You've hunted traitors before. Do you sense deception in me now? Brandon watched tensely from his position, finger resting lightly on the trigger of his rifle. Through their bond, he could feel Alora's genuine desire to convert Carva rather than fight her. These were not just words of manipulation, but a true attempt to reach a former comrade. Carva removed her mask, revealing features similar to Alora's, but harder, shaped by years of combat. Her eyes were silver rather than gold, and they narrowed as she studied Alora. If what you say is true, why not return immediately to warn the Empress? Why hide here? Her nostrils flared. And why do I smell human on you? Alora's composure slipped for an instant. I was injured in my escape. The human found me, saved me. Carva's expression transformed into one of disgust. You allowed a human to touch you? A royal guardian? Brandon felt a wave of complex emotions through their bond. Shame, defiance, and a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. He did more than touch me, Alora said quietly. We formed a bond. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the constant wind of Arcturus seemed to hold its breath. Abomination, Carva whispered finally. You've mind-linked with a lesser species? This is worse than treason. This is heresy against the natural order. In a fluid motion too fast for human eyes to track, Carva drew a weapon from her armor, a short staff that extended into a crackling energy spear. For this alone, you must die. The bloodline of guardians cannot be tainted. What happened next was a blur of movement and energy. Carva launched herself at Alora, the spear describing deadly arcs in the air. Alora moved with equal speed, dodging and weaving, her smaller size making her a difficult target despite Carva's superior reach. Brandon lined up a shot, but hesitated. The two Tigeron were moving so quickly that he risked hitting Alora. Through their bond, he felt her strain as she avoided Carva's attacks, seeking an opening without truly wanting to harm her former comrade. She is too committed to Zerax's lies, Alora's thought came to him. I cannot reach her through words alone. Brandon made a split-second decision. Rather than aiming at Carva, he fired at the ground near her feet. The energy blast kicked up a cloud of dust and debris, momentarily disrupting her focus. It was all the advantage Alora needed. She darted inside Carva's guard, one clawed hand wrapping around the shaft of the energy spear while the other pressed flat against the hunter's forehead. Before Carva could react, Alora forced a mental connection, not the gentle bond she shared with Brandon, but a raw, direct transmission of memory and truth. Brandon felt the echo of it through his own link with Alora. The moment of her discovery of Zerax's plot, the attack in her quarters, her terror and determination as she escaped the sabotage shuttle. And beneath it all, the unshakable loyalty to Empress Vishara that defined Alora's very being. Carva howled, falling to her knees as the forced mental sharing overwhelmed her defenses. When Alora finally released her, the hunter remained kneeling, her weapon forgotten on the ground beside her. Truth, Carva whispered, her voice shaken. You speak truth. Always, Alora confirmed, helping the larger Tigeron to her feet. Now do you understand why I've remained here? I needed to heal, to gather strength. And I found an unexpected ally. Carva's silver eyes shifted to where Brandon now stood, rifle lowered but still at the ready. A human? What can one human do against Zerax's forces? Brandon stepped forward, meeting the alien hunter's gaze without flinching. One human already saved the guardian you were sent to kill, and this human was once a tactical officer in the Interstellar Defense Force. I may not have claws or telepathy, but I know how to fight. A flicker of something like respect crossed Carva's features. She turned back to Alora. The bond you formed, it's true, not just a healing connection, but a true guardian bond. Alora's posture straightened with pride. Yes, different from my bond with Empress Vishara, but equally valid. Brandon Reeves and I can sense each other's thoughts, share memories, even fight as one. The bond formed naturally, without the years of training usually required. Carva hissed softly, a sound Brandon interpreted as dismay. This changes everything. Not only is Xerax a traitor, but your bond with a human challenges our most fundamental beliefs about other species. She retrieved her weapon, collapsing it back into its compact form. If what you claim about Xerax is true, the assassination attempt may already be in motion. My ship can return us to the Imperial homeworld in 3 days. Us? Brandon asked, raising an eyebrow. All of us, Carva confirmed reluctantly. If Allura has truly bonded with you, separating you would weaken her, and we will need every advantage against Xerax. Her expression hardened. But know this, human, what Allura has done, what you both have done, violates our most sacred traditions. Even if we succeed in saving the Empress, your future remains uncertain. Brandon exchanged a glance with Allura, feeling her determination flowing through their connection. One crisis at a time, he said. Let's stop the assassination, then worry about your cultural taboos. As they gathered supplies and prepared to board Carva's ship, Brandon felt a strange mixture of trepidation and exhilaration. For 6 years, he had hidden from his past, from connection, from purpose. Now he was about to travel to an alien world to help prevent an imperial coup, bound to a guardian of a species humans had never even encountered before. Through their mental link, he felt Allura's reassurance. Whatever comes, we face it together. Brandon smiled, the expression unfamiliar after years of solitude. Together, he agreed silently, testing the telepathic connection. Always together. Carva's ship was a marvel of engineering that made Brandon's military experience seem primitive by comparison. Designed for a crew of 3, but capable of being operated by a single pilot, its interior featured adaptive surfaces that reconfigured to accommodate different body types, including, with some adjustment, a human. The journey to the Tigeron homeworld was tense. Carva spent much of her time in the cockpit, ostensibly monitoring systems, but Brandon suspected she was also avoiding close contact with a taboo pairing of human and guardian. This gave Brandon and Allura time to prepare, both physically and mentally. Tell me more about Xerax, Brandon said as they sat cross-legged in the ship's small common area, a holographic map of the Imperial Palace floating between them. What makes him so dangerous? Allura's clawed finger traced the outline of the throne room. Xerax, come from an ancient bloodline of strategists. His mind is formidable. He can anticipate outcomes many steps ahead, like your human chess masters, but with the added dimension of telepathic insight. Can he read minds like you? Not exactly. Male Tigeron have weaker telepathic projection, but stronger defensive capabilities. They can sense emotional states and detect falsehood, but cannot form bonds as guardians do. Her amber markings pulse softly, a sign Brandon had learned indicated concentration. His true power lies in his position. As High Commander, he controls Imperial security and has slowly replaced loyal officers with his own followers. Brandon studied the holographic layout. And the Empress? What's she like? Allura's expression softened, and through their bond, Brandon felt a wave of affection and reverence. Vishara is magnificent, the youngest Empress in 10 generations, but perhaps the wisest. She seeks to reform our empire, to open relations with other species instead of maintaining our traditional isolation. Which is why Xerax wants her gone, Brandon concluded. He's a traditionalist who sees her policies as a threat. Precisely. And my bond with you would only confirm his worst fears about outside influence. Their planning session was interrupted as the ship suddenly dropped out of hyperspace. The change in velocity sending Brandon stumbling despite the inertial dampeners. Carva's voice came over the internal communication system. We have a problem. Imperial patrol vessels have established a blockade around the capital planet. They're hailing us with priority override codes. Brandon and Allura hurried to the cockpit, where a holographic display showed 5 wedge-shaped vessels arranged in a defensive pattern. Xerax must have accelerated his timeline, Allura said grimly. He's isolating the palace. They're demanding identification and boarding rights, Carva reported, her hands moving rapidly over the control interface. Brandon evaluated the tactical situation with a soldier's eye. Can we outrun them? Go around. Not without raising immediate alarms, Carva replied. And they would pursue. We need a different approach. She turned to Allura. We must surrender. What? Brandon exclaimed. That's suicide. Allura placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Not necessarily. Consider, Brandon, what does Xerax believe happened to me? Understanding dawned. He thinks you died in space. He doesn't know you survived. Exactly. And Carva was sent to confirm my death, not to capture me. If she returns with a report of mission success, they'll let us through. Carva finished, already typing a response to the hail. But both of you must remain hidden. The docking inspection will be thorough. What followed was a tense game of deception. Carva hid Brandon and Allura in a shielded compartment designed for transporting sensitive equipment, a space barely large enough for two beings. As the patrol vessel docked and Tigeron security officers boarded, Brandon felt Allura's body pressed against his, her heartbeats, now synchronized into a single, stronger pulse, matching the rapid tempo of his own. Through their bond, they shared the strain of remaining absolutely still, of controlling even their breathing. Brandon lost track of time as minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, they felt the subtle shift as the ships separated and Carva's vessel resumed its journey. The compartment opened to reveal Carva's tense face. It worked. They accepted my report that I found and verified Allura's remains on Arcturus 4. We have clearance to land at the Imperial Complex. How much time do we have? Brandon asked as they extracted themselves from the cramped space. The assassination is planned for the Ascension ceremony, Allura explained. A public event celebrating the anniversary of Ashara's rise to the throne. It begins at sunset. Carva checked the ship's chronometer. 4 hours from now. We'll land in 30 minutes, but reaching the Empress will be challenging. The ceremony preparations mean security will be at its highest. We need allies, Allura said suddenly. Cathros. Carva's expression darkened. The combat master? He's aligned himself with Xerax. Perhaps publicly, Allura countered. But he trained me, shaped me into a guardian. The bond between mentor and student runs deep. If I can reach him, make him see the truth, as I showed you. It's too risky, Carva argued. If he truly serves Xerax, he'll expose us immediately. Brandon, who had been studying the palace schematics, looked up. What about the old training grounds? You've both mentioned them. Would Cathros visit them, perhaps for preparation or meditation before a major ceremony? Allura esse eyes widened. Yes, it was his habit to center himself in the Hall of Ancestors before significant events. If that tradition holds, we can intercept him there, Brandon finished. Away from Xerax's direct observation. Carva reluctantly nodded. It's a better plan than attempting to breach the throne room directly. But we must move quickly and remain undetected until we confront Cathros. Landing at the Imperial Complex was a study in tension. Carva's rank granted them access to a secondary docking bay. But even so, Brandon had to remain hidden while Carva completed the arrival protocols. Once cleared, they moved through service corridors, Allura leading the way through paths only Guardians knew. The Tigeron homeworld was unlike anything Brandon had imagined. Even the utilitarian passages they traversed featured living technology, walls that seemed to breathe, lighting that adjusted organically to their presence, surfaces that responded to the touch of authorized Tigeron. Everything reflected a civilization thousands of years more advanced than humanity's, yet with an aesthetic that celebrated biological forms rather than sterile efficiency. They reached the training grounds without incident, an expansive complex of interconnected chambers dedicated to honing the skills of Guardians. The Hall of Ancestors stood at its heart, a circular room with walls lined by holographic representations of past combat masters. He will come, Allura whispered, positioning herself in the shadows near the entrance. Carva, guard the eastern approach. Brandon, the western. As they took their positions, Brandon felt a subtle shift in their bond. Alora was extending her telepathic awareness, scanning for approaching minds while maintaining her connection to him. The sensation was disorienting at first, like trying to listen to two conversations simultaneously, but he gradually adapted. He comes, Alora's thought came suddenly. Asterisk alone, but troubled. His mind is fractured, asterisk. Brandon tensed, checking his weapon. They had agreed that confrontation was a last resort. Cathros was reportedly one of the most formidable fighters in the Empire, and they needed his alliance, not his enmity. The doors to the hall slid open silently, admitting a powerfully built Tigeron male. Where Alora and Carva moved with predatory grace, Cathros projected disciplined strength. His fur was silver with age, marked with deep blue patterns that indicated his high rank. He wore no armor, but moved as though perpetually ready for combat. He sensed the ambush immediately, dropping into a defensive stance as the doors closed behind him. "Show yourselves," he commanded, voice deep and resonant. Alora stepped from the shadows, her posture respectful but not submissive. "Master Cathros." The combat master's eyes widened fractionally, the only indication of his shock. "Allora, you should be dead." "Many wish it so," she replied evenly. "Including your new master, Zerax." Cathros circled slowly, his gaze never leaving Alora. "You were reported killed attempting to flee after your treason was discovered." "A convenient lie. I was abducted and meant to die anonymously in space." Alora held her ground as he approached. "You trained me, master. You know my mind, my heart. Do you truly believe I would betray Empress Vishara? She who raised me, bonded with me?" Doubt flickered across Cathros's features. The evidence Zerax presented was compelling. Communications with assassins, access codes to restricted areas provided to outsiders. "Fabricated," Alora insisted. "Zerax plans to eliminate Vishara during the Ascension ceremony today. He has positioned his loyalists throughout the palace guard. Once she falls, he will declare martial authority and claim the throne." Cathros's movements stilled. Bold accusations without proof. "I offer the only proof that matters between Tigeron," Alora said, extending her hand, palm forward, the traditional gesture requesting mental connection. "My memories, my truth. Take them and judge." The combat master hesitated, centuries of tradition warring with recent suspicions. Finally, he stepped forward, pressing his palm against Alora's. The connection between them was visible even to Brandon, a subtle aura of energy that surrounded their joined hands. The exchange lasted only seconds, but when they separated, Cathros's expression had transformed from skepticism to cold fury. "Betrayal," he growled. "Not yours, but his. I have been blind, allowing my concern for tradition to cloud my judgment." He turned, noticing Brandon and Carva for the first time as they emerged from hiding. "A human? Here, in the heart of the Imperial complex." "My ally," Alora said firmly. "My bond partner." Cathros stared in disbelief. "A bond? With a human?" His gaze fixed on Brandon with newfound intensity. "Impossible. Our species are not compatible for such connections." "And yet it exists," Alora replied, moving to stand beside Brandon. "Born of necessity and compassion, but no less real for its unusual origins." Brandon met the combat master's scrutinizing gaze without flinching. "I found Alora injured after her escape. The bond formed while I was healing her." Cathros circled Brandon slowly, nostrils flaring as he assessed the human. "Extraordinary. In 10,000 years of recorded history, no Tigeron has successfully bonded with another species." His eyes narrowed. "Demonstrate." Brandon glanced at Alora, who nodded slightly. They had practiced this during the journey, a synchronized display of their mental connection that went beyond mere telepathy. Brandon closed his eyes, and through their bond, he accessed Alora's heightened senses. Suddenly, he could smell the distinct scent markers of every Tigeron who had recently entered the hall, hear the subtle hum of technology embedded in the walls, feel the micro vibrations of distant machinery through the floor. Without opening his eyes, Brandon pointed to a specific spot behind Cathros. 3 days ago, you stood there demonstrating a blade technique to a younger Tigeron. Male, nervous, with an injury to his right forelimb. Cathros's posture stiffened in surprise. My newest strategist trainee. How could you possibly know that? I see through her senses, Brandon explained, opening his eyes. And she through mine. We fight as one, think as one when needed. The combat master's tail lashed once. A gesture Brandon had learned indicated deep thought. This changes everything, he murmured. Not just Zerax's betrayal, but the very foundation of our understanding of guardian bonds. He turned to Carva. And you, Hunter? Where do you stand in this? With the Empress, Carva replied firmly. I was deceived by Zerax, sent to execute Allura without trial. I have seen the truth of his treachery through forced memory sharing. Cathros nodded grimly. Then we have little time. The Ascension ceremony begins in 3 hours, and Zerax has positioned his loyalists throughout the security detail. He moved to a wall panel, pressing his palm against its surface. The panel dissolved, revealing a cache of weapons and armor. We must reach Empress Vishara before the ceremony begins. The royal chambers will be heavily guarded, Allura noted. And approaching openly will alert Zerax immediately. There is another way, Cathros said, selecting an elaborate ceremonial blade from the cache. The ventilation tunnels, originally built as escape routes for the royal family during the succession wars. They connect directly to the Empress's private meditation chamber. Zerax would have sealed them. Carva objected. Perhaps officially, Cathros agreed. But as combat master, I maintain access to all possible entry points as a security measure. It is tradition that predates even Zerax's authority. Brandon studied the weapons Cathros was distributing. The Tigeron technology was advanced but intuitive. Energy weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill, blades made of materials that could cut through almost anything. What exactly is our plan once we reach the Empress? Brandon asked, accepting a curved dagger that seemed to vibrate subtly in his hand. Warning her is only the first step, Allura explained. We must expose Zerax publicly, or he will simply retreat and attempt another coup in the future. Cathros nodded. The Ascension ceremony is performed before all high-ranking officials and transmitted throughout the Empire. If Zerax is revealed as a traitor during the ceremony itself, his supporters will have no choice but to stand down or declare open rebellion. And that's where I come in, Brandon realized. An outsider, a human, bonded to a royal guardian. My very existence challenges everything Zerax stands for. Precisely, Cathros confirmed. Your bond with Allura represents everything Zerax fears about Empress Vishara's policies of openness. If we can demonstrate the bond publicly, it becomes both proof of his deception and repudiation of his isolationist ideology. The plan took shape quickly. Cathros would lead them through the ventilation tunnels to the Empress's private chambers. Once there, Allura would re-establish her bond with Vishara, sharing the evidence of Zerax's treachery. Then, instead of canceling the ceremony, they would proceed with a crucial addition. Brandon and Allura would demonstrate their cross-species bond before the assembled officials, while Cathros and Carva stood ready to intercept any assassination attempt. It is a gamble, Carva said as they prepared to move out. If Zerax realizes we've reached the Empress first, he may accelerate his plans or flee. Then we must move swiftly and silently, Cathros replied. The tunnels have not been used in generations. They will not be monitored. As they slipped into the narrow passage hidden behind another dissolving wall panel, Brandon felt a mixture of determination and apprehension flowing through his bond with Allura. This was not what he had imagined when he'd rescued an injured alien cub from a crashed ship. He was about to become involved in imperial politics of a civilization humanity didn't even know existed. Having second thoughts? Allura's gentle query touched his mind. No, Brandon replied truthfully. Just wondering how I went from exile to potential diplomat in less than 2 weeks. A wave of affection washed through their connection. Asterisk, the universe works in strange patterns, bond partner. Perhaps this was always your path. Asterisk. The ventilation tunnels were masterpieces of ancient engineering, constructed from a material that seemed to absorb sound, with surfaces that glowed faintly to provide illumination. They moved in silence, Cathros leading, followed by Allura and Brandon, with Carva guarding their rear. Twice they had to pause as security patrols passed nearby, their presence detectable through vibrations rather than sound. Each time, Brandon and Allura's bond proved invaluable, her heightened senses providing early warning, his tactical training helping them navigate around potential detection. After what seemed like hours, but was likely less than 40 minutes, Cathros stopped before a circular hatch inscribed with elaborate symbols. The Empress's meditation chamber lies beyond, he whispered. If she follows her usual routine before the ceremony, she should be alone inside. And if she's not, Brandon asked quietly. Then we improvise, Cathros replied, placing his palm against the center of the hatch. The symbols glowed briefly, and the hatch slid open with a faint hiss. The chamber beyond was a study in serene beauty. Walls of living crystal similar to those Brandon had seen in Allura's memories pulsed with gentle light. A garden of strange, phosphorescent plants occupied the center of the circular room, surrounding a raised platform where a solitary figure sat in meditation. Empress Vishara was both exactly as Brandon had seen in shared memories and somehow more imposing in person. Larger than either Allura or Carva, her midnight blue fur was marked with intricate patterns of fiery orange and gold that seemed to flow like liquid light across her form. Around her neck gleamed the ceremonial collar he'd glimpsed in Allura's memory, a band of some unknown metal studded with gems that contained what looked like miniature galaxies. Her eyes opened the moment they entered, not startled but alert, golden like Allura's, but with an inner light that spoke of even greater power and awareness. Combat Master Cathros, she acknowledged, her voice melodic yet commanding. This is unexpected. Her gaze shifted, widening fractionally as she recognized the others. Allura. Allura stepped forward, dropping immediately into a formal bow, her forehead touching the floor. My Empress, I have returned to warn you. Your life is in danger. Vishara rose in a single fluid motion, crossing the space between them with graceful speed. My guardian alive? She reached out, gently tilting Allura's face upward. Rise. Explain how you come to be here when Xerax reported your death with such certainty. As Allura stood, Brandon felt a powerful telepathic current flow between Guardian and Empress, a bond similar to but distinct from what he shared with Allura. It was deeper, more established, rich with years of shared experience. Xerax deceived you, my Empress, Allura said, both aloud and clearly through mental projection that even Brandon could sense. He plans to assassinate you during today's ceremony and seize power. I discovered his plot and was abducted, meant to die anonymously in space. Instead, she crashed on a frontier world, Brandon added, drawing Vishara's penetrating gaze for the first time. I found her injured and helped her recover. The Empress studied him with unnerving intensity. A human, she observed, far from your territories. Her nostrils flared slightly, and carrying the scent markers of my guardian. Her gaze returned to Allura. Explain. We have formed a bond, my Empress, Allura said, straightening with pride rather than shame. Not to replace what we share, but born of necessity and growing into something unique. Brandon Reeves saved my life, and in doing so, became connected to my mind and spirit. Vishara's surprise was evident, but she controlled it quickly. A cross-species guardian bond? This is unprecedented. She looked at Brandon with renewed interest. Is this why Xerax was so insistent that Allura had committed treason? Because he discovered your connection to a human. It confirmed his worst fears about your policies of openness, Cathros explained. Xerax believes that any dilution of pure Tigaron culture threatens our dominance. A guardian bonding with a human represents everything he stands against. The Empress circled Brandon slowly, evaluating him as one might a rare specimen. You understand, human, that you have become entangled in imperial politics of the highest order? That your very existence challenges millennia of Tigeron tradition? Brandon met her gaze steadily. Understand that Alora and I share something that transcends species, and that Xerax is willing to commit murder to prevent your vision of the future from becoming reality. A smile curved Vishara's feline features, the first he'd seen from any Tigeron besides Alora. Well spoken. She turned to Catharos. You believe these accusations against the High Commander? I have witnessed Alora's memories directly, the combat master confirmed. The evidence is irrefutable. Xerax has positioned his loyalists throughout today's security detail. He plans to strike during the renewal of vows, when you are most vulnerable. Ashara's expression hardened. Then we must act decisively. She moved to a wall panel similar to the one Catharos had accessed earlier, revealing not weapons, but a communication interface. I could cancel the ceremony, order Xerax's immediate arrest. Respectfully, my Empress, that would only drive the conspiracy underground, Carva interjected. Xerax's supporters are embedded throughout the Imperial structure. Unless he is exposed publicly, they will remain a threat. We have a plan, Alora said, stepping forward. One that not only neutralizes Xerax, but turns his own prejudices against him. As they explained their strategy, Brandon watched the Empress's expression shift from skepticism to calculation to approval. When they finished, she nodded decisively. Audacious but fitting, she said. Xerax has always underestimated the power of bonds, believing strength comes from isolation and purity. Today, he will learn otherwise. She turned to Brandon. Human, are you prepared for what this means? Once you stand beside my guardian in the throne room, there is no returning to anonymity. You will become part of Tigeron history, for better or worse. Brandon thought of the years of isolation he'd imposed on himself, the guilt and loneliness that had driven him to the edges of human space. Through his bond with Alora, he felt her complete confidence in him, not just in his abilities, but in his worth as a being. I've been hiding long enough, he said firmly. If our bond can help prevent a murder and maybe build a bridge between our species, I'm ready. Then let us prepare, Vishara said, her regal composure returning. The ceremony begins in less than 2 hours, and we have much to arrange if we are to turn Xerax's trap against him. The preparations were intense and precise. Vishara summoned a small circle of absolutely trusted attendants, guardians who had served her family for generations and whose loyalty was beyond question. The Empress shared Alora's memories directly with them, providing irrefutable proof of Xerax's treachery. Meanwhile, Catharos worked with Brandon and Carva to develop contingency plans for every possible scenario. They studied the layout of the throne room, identified potential sniper positions, and established defensive formations that would protect Vishara without alerting Xerax's supporters prematurely. The critical moment will be the renewal of vows, Catharos explained, indicating a position on the holographic display of the throne room. Traditionally, the Empress kneels here, symbolically offering her commitment to the Empire before rising renewed in authority. It is when she is most exposed, and when Xerax expects to strike, Carva added. His assassin will likely be positioned in the upper gallery here. She pointed to an elevated section overlooking the throne. Brandon studied the layout, military training snapping into focus. If I were planning this, I'd have multiple shooters, not just one. Backups in case the primary is identified. Agreed, Catharos said with a nod of approval. Which is why we will not be announcing our suspicions until after we've neutralized the immediate threat. As the hour of the ceremony approached, Brandon was provided with formal attire. Not Tigeron armor, which would have been inappropriate and ill-fitting, but a tailored garment that combined elements of imperial design with accommodations for human physiology. The fabric seemed alive against his skin, adjusting temperature and pressure to maintain perfect comfort. Alora, too, was transformed. Her guardian armor, retrieved from imperial stores, enhanced her already impressive presence. Made of the same living metal, as Vishara's collar. It flowed across her form like quicksilver, accentuating rather than restricting her movement. When she rejoined Brandon, he almost didn't recognize her. This was Allura as she was meant to be, a royal guardian in her full glory. Nervous, her thought touched his mind. Terrified, he admitted, but ready. The plan required perfect timing. Vishara would proceed with the ceremony as expected, with Allura hidden among her traditional guardian escort. Brandon, Carva, and Cathros would enter through separate access points, positioned to intercept any attack. Only when the moment of greatest danger had passed would they reveal their presence and expose Xerax. The throne room itself exceeded even the grandeur Brandon had glimpsed in Allura's memories. Vast enough to hold hundreds of Tigeron officials and nobility, its soaring ceiling was a living representation of their star system, planets and moons rotating in slow, stately orbits. The walls were that same living crystal he'd seen before, but here they were carved with the history of the Empire, scenes that shifted and moved as though the past were unfolding before their eyes. Brandon took his position in a concealed alcove near the throne, provided with a one-way viewing panel that allowed him to observe without being seen. Through their bond, he maintained constant contact with Allura, who moved among the Empress's escort with practiced ease, her identity concealed by a ceremonial helmet. The assembled dignitaries arrived in order of rank and importance. Brandon recognized many types from Allura's memories: the silver-furred strategists, muscular hunters, imposing guardians. Last to enter, flanked by an honor guard of his own choosing, was High Commander Xerax. Even without prior knowledge of his treachery, Brandon would have found him unsettling. Larger than most male Tigeron, Xerax's black fur was marked with cold blue patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than emit it. His bearing was proud to the point of arrogance, his gaze calculating as it swept the chamber. He suspects nothing, Allura's thought came to Brandon. His mind is focused on the ceremony, on the moment of strike. Can you sense the assassins? Brandon asked mentally. *3. Upper gallery, as predicted. And one below. A contingency I hadn't anticipated. *. Brandon relayed this information to Cathros through a secure communication device. The combat master acknowledged with a single click, already moving to neutralize the threat beneath the throne dais. The ceremony began with a procession of light and sound, Tigeron music unlike anything Brandon had heard before, resonant tones that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly in the bones. Empress Vishara entered last, her regalia magnificent, her presence commanding absolute attention. From his hidden position, Brandon watched as she addressed the assembled elite of her empire, speaking of tradition and progress, of honoring the past while embracing the future. Throughout, he monitored Xerax's reactions through Allura's enhanced senses. The High Commander maintained a mask of solemn respect, but beneath it, Brandon could sense his growing anticipation. The moment approached. Vishara moved to the center of the dais, preparing for the renewal of vows. As she knelt, Brandon tensed, ready to move. Through their bond, he felt Allura do the same. Now, her thought came, sharp with urgency. Brandon burst from his hiding place just as the first assassin revealed himself in the upper gallery. Before the attacker could fire, Carva's precisely aimed shot struck him, sending him crumpling to the floor. Simultaneously, Cathros emerged from beneath the dais, restraining the hidden assassin with a neural suppression device. The throne room erupted into chaos. Guards moved to protect dignitaries, while Xerax's supporters looked to him for direction. The High Commander himself appeared momentarily stunned by the disruption before his training took over. "Protect the Empress," he commanded, drawing his ceremonial weapon. "Intruders have breached security." But Vishara had not moved from her position at the center of the dais. Instead, she rose calmly to her full height, her voice cutting through the chaos with imperial authority. "Stand down, all of you," she commanded. "What you witness is not an attack on your Empress, but the exposure of one." Allura removed her concealing helmet, taking her place beside Vishara. A murmur ran through the assembled Tigeron, the Guardian believed dead, now standing proudly at the Empress's side. "My loyal Guardian has returned," Vishara announced, bringing evidence of treason at the highest levels of our empire. Zerax's composure slipped for an instant before he recovered. "This is some trick," he declared. "That creature cannot be Allura. She was confirmed dead. This is an imposter, part of an attempted coup." "No imposter," Cathros stated, stepping forward with the captured assassin. "No coup except the one you planned, High Commander. These assassins bear your personal insignia on their weapons. They have already confessed their orders came directly from you." Brandon moved to stand beside Allura, completing their unusual quartet. His appearance, clearly human, clearly alien, caused another wave of shock to ripple through the throne room. "A human," Zerax snarled, genuine disgust overwhelming his careful mask. "You bring a human into the sacred heart of our empire? This only confirms the corruption I have warned against." "This human," Vishara replied calmly, "saved the life of my guardian when you arranged for her murder. And in doing so, they formed a bond that you insisted was impossible, a guardian bond that transcends species." The revelation sent a shock wave through the assembly. Cross-species bonding was not merely unprecedented. It had been deemed biologically impossible by generations of Tigaron scientists. Many of the assembled officials began backing away from Zerax, physically distancing themselves from his increasingly untenable position. Sensing the shift in the room, Zerax made a desperate final play. Even if this human somehow formed a primitive connection with a guardian, it only proves the danger of outside contamination. Our traditions evolve, Vishara interrupted, as they always have. The first guardians bonded only within family lines, until we discovered stronger connections could be formed across bloodlines. We once believed only females could form guardian bonds, until a male proved otherwise 3 centuries ago. She gestured to Brandon and Allura. Now we discover that the capacity for deep connection exists beyond our species. This is not contamination, High Commander. It is growth. Zerax's expression contorted with fury. "You will destroy everything that makes us Tigaron, dilute our power, weaken our position in the galaxy. Demonstrate the bond," Vishara commanded, ignoring Zerax's outburst. "Show them what is possible." Brandon and Allura exchanged a glance before stepping to the center of the dais. They had practiced this during the journey, a public demonstration of their connection that would be unmistakable even to non-telepathic observers. They stood facing each other, arms extended but not quite touching. Between them, a visible energy began to form, a manifestation of their mental connection that appeared as dancing motes of golden light. The light intensified, bridging the space between them, until they were encased in a shared aura that pulsed in perfect harmony with their matched heartbeats. Then, without physical contact, they began to move, a perfectly synchronized combat form that Allura had taught Brandon during their preparation. Each motion mirrored the other's exactly, down to the smallest detail, despite the differences in their physiology. It was a dance of absolute unity, impossible to fake or rehearse through conventional means. The throne room fell silent in collective awe. Even Zerax seemed momentarily speechless, his certainty visibly crumbling. "This is what you feared," Vishara said into the silence. "Not weakness through connection, but strength beyond your control. You cannot conceive of power that doesn't dominate but instead collaborates." Before Zerax could respond, Allura stepped forward, extending her hand palm forward, the formal request for mental connection that Brandon had seen her use with Cathros. "Share your truth," she challenged Zerax. "If you are innocent, let all witness your thoughts directly." It was a demand he could not refuse without admitting guilt, nor accept without revealing his treachery. Zerax's gaze darted around the room, calculating, before settling on a desperate final option. With a snarl of fury, he lunged toward Vishara, ceremonial blade extended. He never reached her. Brandon and Allura moved as one, intercepting him with perfect coordination. Brandon blocked the arm holding the blade, while Allura delivered a precise strike to Zerax's central nervous cluster. The High Commander collapsed, conscious but immobilized. "I did not wish to believe it," Vishara said sadly, looking down at her fallen commander. "Even with the evidence before me, I hoped there was some explanation beyond ambition and fear." She turned to the assembled officials. "High Commander Zerax is hereby stripped of all rank and authority, to be held for formal trial on charges of treason and attempted regicide." As Imperial Guards moved to take Zerax into custody, Vishara turned to address the still-stunned assembly. Today was to be a celebration of tradition, a reaffirmation of our past. Instead, it has become something more significant, a glimpse of our future. She gestured to Brandon and Allura. "What you have witnessed is not a dilution of Tigeron's strength, but an expansion of it. If we can form bonds beyond our species, what else might be possible?" Her gaze swept the assembly. "For too long, we have isolated ourselves from the wider galaxy, believing our superiority required distance. Today proves otherwise. Strength comes not from isolation, but from connection, from bonds that transcend the limitations we impose upon ourselves." As the ceremony concluded and the dignitaries were escorted out, Vishara summoned Brandon, Allura, Cathros, and Carva to a private chamber adjacent to the throne room. Despite the formality of her public persona, in this smaller setting, her relief was evident. "You have my eternal gratitude," she said simply. "All of you. We serve the Empire as duty required," Cathros replied, bowing his head. "Indeed," Vishara agreed, "but duty alone would not have created what I witnessed today." She turned to Brandon and Allura. "Your bond, it is something our scientists will wish to study for generations." Brandon felt a flicker of apprehension through his connection with Allura. "With respect, Empress, we are not laboratory specimens." Vishara's expression softened. "Of course not. I speak not of dissection, but of celebration, understanding how such a connection formed, so we might foster others." She considered them thoughtfully. "Though this does raise the question of your future. Allura, your position as my guardian awaits your return. But your bond with this human complicates matters." The moment hung between them. The unspoken acknowledgement that separating Brandon and Allura would damage them both. Yet maintaining their connection while Allura served as royal guardian seemed equally impossible. It was Carva who offered a solution. "Perhaps, my Empress, this represents an opportunity rather than a complication. If we truly wish to explore connection with other species, we require representatives who understand both worlds." Vishara's eyes brightened with interest. "An embassy? Not here in the Imperial Center, perhaps, but somewhere significant to both parties." "Arcturus IV," Brandon suggested, "where we first met. It's a frontier world, distant enough from both our civilizations to be neutral, yet connected to established trade routes." The Empress nodded slowly. "A diplomatic outpost, with you both as its first representatives. Allura maintaining her guardian status, but with a new assignment, fostering understanding between our peoples." Through their bond, Brandon felt Allura's excitement at the prospect. Not separation, not confinement, but new purpose that honored both their connection and her duty to her Empress. "It would be our honor," Allura said formally, but her thoughts to Brandon carried deeper joy. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Zerax's trial revealed the full extent of his conspiracy. Dozens of officials implicated, centuries of isolationist policy threatened by a single demonstration of cross-species bonding. While many traditionalists remained uncomfortable with the implications, the undeniable reality of Brandon and Allura's connection could not be dismissed. Preparations for the diplomatic outpost on Arcturus IV proceeded rapidly. Vishara, true to her progressive vision, authorized resources beyond Brandon's wildest expectations. His humble shelter was transformed into a complex of buildings that harmonized Tigeron and human architectural elements, a physical manifestation of the bridge they were building between worlds. The official opening of the outpost was a relatively small affair by imperial standards. Only a handful of Tigaron officials and human representatives from the frontier colonies attended. Vishara herself presided, establishing the formal protocols that would govern this first tentative connection between their civilizations. As twilight fell on the ceremony's conclusion, Brandon found himself standing with Allura on the ridge where they had once faced Carva in combat. Now the spot featured a meditation garden, with plants from both worlds growing in carefully planned harmony. "Did you ever imagine this?" Brandon asked, watching as the stars began to appear in Arcturus IV's violet sky. "When you crashed here, when I found you injured, did you ever think it would lead to this?" Allura's mental touch was warm with affection. Asterisk in the moment? No. But looking back, it seems inevitable, as though all paths were leading to this junction. Asterisk. Ambassador Allura has a nice ring to it, Brandon teased. Though I'm not sure what that makes me. Honorary Guardian Reeves, came Vishara's voice as she approached from behind them. The Empress had dispensed with most of her ceremonial regalia, appearing almost casual in the fading light. "If you would accept the title." Brandon turned in surprise. "Honorary Guardian? Is that even possible?" "I am the Empress," Vishara replied with a hint of amusement. "I determine what is possible." Her expression grew more serious. "Your bond with Allura has already rewritten what we believed about our species. Why not formalize your status as well?" Before Brandon could respond, Vishara removed something from a pouch at her waist, a smaller version of her own ceremonial collar, sized for human proportions. "This is not merely decorative," she explained. "It contains technologies that will enhance your natural telepathic abilities, strengthening your bond and extending your lifespan to better match Allura's." Brandon stared at the offered collar, stunned by its implications. "You would grant me this? Even though humans and Tigaron have barely begun formal relations? Be resistance from both our peoples, suspicion and fear of what your bond represents. This will help you face those challenges together." With trembling hands, Brandon accepted the collar, feeling its strange weight, both physical and symbolic. Through their bond, Allura's joy and pride washed over him, along with something deeper, something that transcended the limitations of language. Later that night, after Vishara and her entourage had departed for the Imperial homeworld, Brandon and Allura stood alone on the balcony of their new home, gazing up at the stars that no longer represented barriers between worlds, but pathways connecting them. "So," Brandon said softly, fingering the collar now settled comfortably around his neck, "Honorary Guardian. That's going to take some getting used to." "As will Ambassador," Allura replied, her mental voice warm with amusement. "But we have time." Brandon looked at her, really looked at the being who had crashed into his life and transformed it completely. In her eyes, he saw not just the fierce guardian or the diplomatic ambassador, but his bond partner, the one who had reached across the gulf of species and found him when he was lost. "Time," he agreed, reaching out to take her hand. The touch sent a cascade of shared emotion between them, too complex for words, but perfectly understood by both. "Always together." Allura's response flowed through their bond, carrying certainty that transcended doubt or distance or difference. "Always together."